The year was 3472, and the galaxy was ruled by the Galactic Council, a cold, merciless government made of metallic minds and greedy hearts. Every planet under their control paid heavy taxes, even the poorest colonies where children worked in mines. No one dared to question their laws until the decree was announced. It began with a broadcast that echoed across every screen and speaker in the galaxy. A sharp, emotionless voice declared, "All unregistered orphans are to be seized and sold to the highest bidder. Their sale will repay the debts of their planets. Obedience is survival." On the small mining planet Zareth 9, the words struck like thunder. The wind carried the sound through the rusted streets, through the crowded worker camps, into every home where fear lived. Parents hid their children. Old men whispered curses. But for one man, a human named Elias Ward, those words were not just cruel. They were personal. Elias sat in his dim workshop, fixing an old mining drone when the decree came through the speaker. His hands froze mid-motion and the tiny sparks from his welding tool faded. His eyes, tired and scarred from years of hard labor, lifted toward the screen. He saw the council's seal, a silver serpent circling a planet, and the words repeated again. He turned slowly toward the corner of the room. 3 small figures were huddled under a worn blanket. They weren't human. They were orphans of war. Children from different alien races who had lost their families during the Varkon invasion years ago. Elias had found them half-starved in a destroyed village, and something inside him, the same human heart that once fought for freedom, couldn't walk away. The oldest, Kira, had soft violet skin and glowing blue eyes. She was quiet but brave, always watching over the younger ones. The middle child, Rin, had silver hair and could make tiny sparks appear when he sneezed, a strange gift that scared him. And the youngest, Lyri, barely 5, had fragile lungs that wheezed softly when she laughed. Elias had built her a small breathing mask from scrap parts. Now that mask hissed gently as she slept. He whispered, voice shaking, "They can't take you. They won't." Outside, the sounds of patrol ships grew louder. The metallic whine of engines echoed through the streets like hungry wolves. The council's enforcers were already rounding up children, tagging them and loading them into steel containers like cargo. The night sky of Zareth 9 glowed red with their engines. Elias rushed to the window and pulled the curtain aside. His heart pounded. He saw neighbors crying as soldiers dragged their children away. The people didn't resist. No one ever resisted the council. But Elias had seen too much war, too much pain. He had once been a soldier in the Earth Resistance Army, before humans were scattered across the stars. He had sworn never to fight again. Yet now the fight had come to his door. He grabbed his old plasma wrench, a heavy tool that could cut through metal like butter. His hands trembled, not with fear but with anger. "Get up," he told the children quietly. "We have to go now." Kira blinked, confused. "Uncle Eli, what's happening?" "They want to take you," he said, his voice breaking. "But I won't let them." The girl's eyes widened. "But where will we go?" Elias looked out again at the dark sky. He didn't have an answer. The planet was surrounded by the council's ships. Escape seemed impossible, but staying meant slavery or worse. Then came the knock. 3 sharp bangs on the metal door. "Open in the name of the council." Elias froze. The children clung to his legs. He took a deep breath. The air smelled of oil, metal, and fear. He turned off the lights and whispered, "Hide under the floor. Don't make a sound." The children slipped into a secret hatch he had built years ago, a small space between the floor panels where they stored tools and food. He closed it gently and turned toward the door. The knock came again, harder this time. "Elias Ward," a mechanical voice shouted. "You are harboring unregistered orphans. Open or be executed." Elias tightened his grip on the plasma wrench. He could hear his heartbeat echo in his ears. For a moment he remembered his late wife, her smile, her promise to take care of the weak. She had died during the war, saving children from a collapsing colony ship. He whispered to himself, "For you, Mara, for them." The door burst open with a blast. 3 armored guards stepped inside, their visors glowing red. One of them spoke. "By law, these children belong to the council." Elias lifted the wrench slowly. The light flickered across his face, showing fire in his eyes. "Then the law," he said, "is wrong." Before the guard could react, Elias swung the wrench with all his strength. Sparks flew. Metal clashed. The small workshop filled with the sound of defiance, and in that moment, a single human father began a war that would shake the stars. The night smelled of smoke and metal. Sparks still danced in the air where Elias's plasma wrench had struck the first guard. One soldier lay unconscious, another stumbled back, clutching his arm where the tool had burned through armor. The third guard aimed a blaster at Elias's chest, but Elias was faster. He slammed the wrench into the barrel, twisting it upward. The shot fired into the ceiling, leaving a smoking hole. For a brief second, the workshop was filled with silence, the kind of silence that comes right before chaos. Then alarms screamed through the district. The council's surveillance drones had seen everything. Elias stood there, breathing hard, sweat dripping down his temple. His muscles ached, but he didn't care. He had broken the law. No, he had broken the chain that held them all in fear. From under the floor, a small voice whispered, "Uncle Eli?" He dropped the wrench and hurried to lift the hatch. The children's eyes were wide and shining with tears. "We have to move," he said quickly. "Now." Outside, the night of Zareth 9 was alive with flashing lights. Sirens echoed through the valley. The metallic towers of the city glowed red as search beams swept across the rooftops. The council's soldiers were coming, hundreds of them. Elias stuffed what little food he had into a small pack and handed it to Kira. "Take care of Leary," he said firmly. "Stay close to me and don't stop running no matter what happens." Kira nodded, trying to be brave, though her hands shook. Rin grabbed Elias's sleeve, his voice trembling. "Are we going to die?" Elias looked down at him and forced a small smile. "Not tonight." They slipped through the back door and ran into the narrow alleys behind the workshop. The walls were covered with rust and graffiti, the ground wet with oil. Every few seconds, a drone flew overhead, shining its blinding light down the street. Elias led them through the maze of old mining tunnels that connected the city's lower levels. He knew these tunnels well. He had repaired machines here for years. Now they became his escape route. As they moved deeper underground, the air grew thick and heavy. The faint hum of machinery surrounded them. Somewhere above, he could still hear the council's loudspeakers announcing his name. "Elias Ward, human male charged with rebellion. Capture on sight. Reward, 100,000 credits." Elias gritted his teeth. "A reward, huh?" he muttered under his breath. "Guess that makes me famous." Kira glanced up at him, whispering, "They're hunting us because you fought back." He nodded. "Someone had to." They stopped near an old transport shaft that led to the lower mines. It hadn't worked in years, but Elias knew how to fix it. He knelt down and opened a control panel, sparks lighting his face. "I used to fix these when I was your age," he said softly, mostly to himself. Funny how life turns. While he worked, Leary coughed behind him, her breathing mask hissing weakly. Elias turned, concern in his eyes. He adjusted the dial and smiled. "It's okay, little one. Just hold on. We'll be safe soon." But safety was a lie. One he told himself to keep moving. The sound of metal boots echoed down the corridor. They were close. Elias forced the elevator's circuit back to life. The old platform shuddered, then began to descend slowly into the darkness. As it moved, Rin pressed against Elias's side and whispered, "Why do you care so much about us? We're not even human." Elias looked at him for a long moment. His face softened. "Because family isn't about what you are," he said quietly. "It's about who you protect." The platform creaked as it reached the lower mines. They stepped off and were met by a wall of steam and glowing rock. The mines stretched for miles, a network of tunnels built by slaves and forgotten workers. Elias led them into a side tunnel and sealed the door behind them. For a short time there was peace. The children sat beside an old furnace, warming their hands. Elias watched them, tired but proud. He knew what his actions meant. The whole galaxy had seen a human father fight the Council's soldiers. Word would spread fast, and indeed it did. In the cities above, workers whispered about him. In the colonies beyond, miners raised their heads for the first time in years. Even on faraway planets, people asked the same question. If one man can defy them, why can't we? Elias didn't know that yet. He only knew he had to keep the children alive. Suddenly a voice echoed through the tunnel, metallic, sharp, close. "End of the line, human," Elias turned. A group of enforcers stood at the tunnel's mouth, their weapons glowing. Behind them, a drone hovered, recording everything. Kira screamed. Leary began to cry. Rin grabbed Elias's arm in fear. Elias stood tall, his shadow long in the red light. His voice was steady when he said, "If you want them, you'll have to go through me." The leader of the enforcers tilted his head. "You can't win." Elias raised his wrench again, his eyes blazing with fury and love. "I don't need to win," he said. "I just need to fight." And with that he charged. A single man against machines. A father who refused to bow. The mines of Zareth 9 were never silent. Even in the deepest tunnels, the air trembled with the faint hum of forgotten machines and the whisper of molten rock flowing beneath the metal floor. But on this night, the sounds were different, sharper, restless. Something powerful was awakening in the dark. Elias stood with his back against the wall, clutching his plasma wrench. His breath came in quick bursts, his muscles trembling from exhaustion. In front of him, the three children pressed close together, fear shining in their eyes. The tunnel glowed faintly red from the energy weapons of the enforcers closing in. He had fought until his body could barely stand. Each swing of his wrench bought only seconds. The enemies were machines built for war, and he was only human. Sparks lit the tunnel like lightning every time his weapon struck metal. But there were too many. "Uncle Eli," Kira shouted as a blast tore past them, melting part of the tunnel wall. "They're surrounding us!" Elias gritted his teeth. He looked at the children, their faces smudged with dust and fear. He had promised to protect them, but he had no plan left. He thought of his wife, Mara, and her last words. "Don't give up on life even when it gives up on you." He forced a smile. "Stay behind me," he said, though his voice shook. "I'll hold them off." But before he could step forward, something strange happened. The air rippled. The ground vibrated beneath their feet. Kira's eyes glowed a deeper blue than before, bright, almost blinding. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "I don't want them to hurt you." Then, the light burst out of her hands. It was like watching lightning trapped inside glass. The tunnel walls shook violently. Energy surged through the metal floor, throwing the enforcers backward. Their armor flickered and sparked as their systems overloaded. In seconds, the entire squad was down, twitching and silent. Elias stared in shock. The glow in Kira's eyes faded, and she fell to her knees, breathing hard. The air smelled of ozone and burnt metal. "Kid," Elias whispered, kneeling beside her. "What did you just do?" I don't know," she said weakly. "It just happened." Before Elias could speak again, a faint sound came from behind them, Rin sneezing. A small burst of silver sparks shot from his fingertips, hitting a nearby pipe. The pipe bent like soft clay. Elias blinked. "You too?" Rin looked terrified. "I didn't mean to. It just happens when I'm scared." Elias stared at both of them, realization dawning in his mind. The council hadn't just wanted them because they were orphans. They were special. Not born that way, unmade that way. It hit him like a blow. These children weren't just survivors of war. They were experiments, created during the Varkon genetic wars. The council must have hidden their origins, planning to use them as weapons later. That was why they wanted them back. And now, Elias was protecting 3 living secrets powerful enough to shake empires. He looked at Leary, the youngest, fragile and quiet. Her eyes were half closed, her breathing mask humming softly. He gently touched her cheek. "You don't have powers too, do you?" Leary smiled faintly, then coughed. A small trail of glowing mist escaped her mouth, swirling into the air like silver smoke. When it touched Elias's arm, his cuts closed instantly. He stared in disbelief. "You ought to healed me." Leary nodded sleepily. "It hurts when I do it," she whispered. "But you were bleeding." Elias's chest tightened. He looked at them. 3 small beings carrying gifts that could save or destroy worlds. "You're not weapons," he said softly. "You're miracles." The sound of drones returning snapped him back to reality. They had little time. He helped Kira up and looked around the dark tunnel. There was one way out, an old freight elevator that led to the surface. "Come on," he said, urgency in his voice. "We have to move before they recover." They ran toward the elevator, boots pounding on metal. The old lift groaned as Elias hit the switch. As it rose, the mines below flickered with faint blue light from Kira's last energy burst. Halfway up, the lift jolted suddenly. Elias looked down. A swarm of drones was chasing them, glowing red eyes cutting through the darkness. He raised his wrench, ready to strike, but Rin stepped forward. "Let me try something." He closed his eyes, his hands shaking. Sparks gathered around his palms like silver fireflies. Then he pushed them forward. The metal cables of the elevator pulsed and the drone's sensors went black. One by one, they crashed into the tunnel walls and exploded. When the elevator reached the surface, Elias grabbed Rin by the shoulders. "You're incredible," he said. Rin smiled weakly. "You think so?" "I know so." They stepped out into the cold night air. Above them, the stars burned bright, silent witnesses to the chaos below. Elias looked up at them and whispered, "They'll never stop hunting us now." Kira touched his hand. "Then we keep running." He nodded, looking at the children. The reason he was still alive. The reason he would never surrender. Far above, hidden among the stars, the Varkon Council watched the footage of Kira's power. One of the counselors turned to the others. "The human has no idea what he's protecting. Retrieve them at any cost." And somewhere in the dark sky, a fleet began to move. The hunt was far from over. The next dawn on Zareth 9 rose in shades of blood red and gray. The sun struggled to pierce through the smog clouds drifting over the mining fields. Smoke curled from ruined towers and the air smelled of dust and burned metal. The Varkon patrols had tightened their search. Every street carried the echo of marching boots and the low hum of hunter drones. Elias Ward knew the walls were closing in. He led the 3 children through the scrapyard outskirts, moving between piles of old ship parts and twisted machinery. Each step was heavy with exhaustion, but none of them dared stop. Kira's powers had drained her strength. Rin's hand still sparked uncontrollably when he was nervous. Lyri's breathing mask hissed with every breath. Elias scanned the horizon. "We can't stay here," he muttered. "We need a ship." That's when he saw it, an old freighter half buried in sand, its hull scorched but its engines intact. A small campfire burned beside it, and next to the fire sat a man with a half-mechanical face and a grin sharp enough to cut metal. Captain Jorik Vale. Elias froze. "You've got to be kidding me," he whispered. Jorik looked up, his cybernetic eye glowing faintly red. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, rising to his feet. "If it isn't Elias Ward, the man who broke a council squad with a wrench." He laughed. "You always had a flair for the dramatic." Elias didn't smile. "I need help," he said simply. "A ship. Off-world passage for 4. Jorik tilted his head. 4, including those little ones? His gaze slid to the children, studying them with curiosity. "They don't look human." "They're not," Elias said. "But they're mine." Jorik raised an eyebrow. "Yours, huh? Didn't think you were the fatherly type." "People change," Elias replied. Jorik chuckled, then motioned to the ship. "Lucky for you, old friend, I've still got a freighter that works. Maybe I can get you past the blockade." Elias frowned. "Maybe?" "Depends," Jorik said, walking closer. "The council's paying a fortune for information on you. I could retire for 10 lifetimes with that kind of money." The children stiffened. Rin's small hand crackled with faint energy. Elias stepped in front of them. "You wouldn't," he said, voice low. Jorik smirked. "Relax, Eli, I'm joking." He tapped his metal chest. "You saved my life once during the war. I still owe you for that. I'll get you out of here." Elias didn't trust the smile, but he had no choice. The planet was crawling with hunters. By nightfall, they were aboard the freighter Silver Comet. The old ship creaked as engines came alive for the first time in years. Through the small viewing window, Elias saw the stars, distant, beautiful, and out of reach. Kira sat beside him. "Do you trust him?" she asked softly. Elias shook his head. "Not really. But right now, trust is all we've got." The ship lifted off, rising through the polluted sky. Below, the lights of Zareth 9 grew smaller until they disappeared. For a moment, hope filled the cabin. Lyri smiled weakly and leaned her head on Elias's shoulder. Rin watched the stars with wonder, but far behind them, Jorik's hand moved over the control console. A hidden light blinked and a transmission signal. He typed a code into the comm system, his voice low. "This is Captain Vale, confirming coordinates for human target Elias Ward. Payment upon delivery." The council replied instantly. "Acknowledged. Maintain course. Drones inbound." Jorik ended the transmission and sighed. His smile faded for a moment. "Sorry, old friend," he whispered, "but debts don't pay themselves." Hours later, while the children slept, Elias sat near the cargo bay. He couldn't rest. Something felt wrong, a gut feeling from his days as a soldier. The hum of the engines was steady, but beneath it he thought he heard another sound, a faint beeping. He stood, walked toward the console, and saw the signal light blinking on the dashboard. His stomach sank. It wasn't part of the normal systems. Someone was transmitting their location. "Jorik," he called out sharply. "What did you do?" The smuggler froze. "Eli, listen. You sold us out," Elias growled. His hand gripped the plasma wrench tightly. Before Jorik could answer, the ship shuddered. A blinding red light filled the cabin. The radar screamed with warnings. Council interceptors inbound. Kira woke up screaming as the ship tilted violently. "They found us." Elias turned to Jorik, rage in his voice. "You betrayed us." Jorik looked guilty, his human eye trembling. "They said they'd only take the kids." "I thought." Elias didn't let him finish. "You thought wrong." The human slammed his fist into the emergency hatch controls. The door burst open with a hiss of pressure. The freighter's alarms blared louder as air rushed out. Elias grabbed a parachute pod and strapped it on Kira and Rin. "Take Leary and jump when I say," he ordered. Kira's eyes widened. "What about you?" "I'll hold them off." Jorik tried to speak, but Elias shoved him aside. The father looked at the children one last time, his heart breaking and burning at once. "Remember," he said softly, "you're more than what they made you." Then he hit the release. The pod ejected into the cold night sky, streaking through the darkness like a falling star. The council ships closed in, blasters flashing. Elias turned back toward Jorik. "Tell them I died fighting," he said. "Make it true." Then, wrench in hand, Elias charged toward the cockpit as the silver comet dove into the storm. Outside, the stars blinked, silent witnesses to betrayal, sacrifice, and the first flicker of rebellion that would soon spread across the galaxy. The world came back to Elias Ward in fire and thunder. When he opened his eyes, the cockpit of the silver comet was gone. The ship had crashed into the wastelands outside Zareth 9's main city. Smoke rose from the wreck, painting the horizon black. His head throbbed, his arm was bleeding, and the taste of ash filled his mouth. He tried to move, but something heavy pressed against his chest and a shattered beam from the ship's hull. "Jorik." Elias groaned, forcing himself to lift it. The sound of metal grinding echoed in the air. Nearby, Jorik Vale lay sprawled on the sand, half-conscious, sparks flickering from his cybernetic face. He coughed, the smell of burning circuits around him. "Eli," he rasped, his voice full of guilt. I didn't mean." Elias slammed his fist into the dirt. "You sold us," he said through clenched teeth. "You sold children." Jorik's mechanical eye dimmed. "I thought I could buy them time. But the council, they don't bargain." Before Elias could answer, the sky darkened. A shadow passed over the wreckage. He looked up and saw it. A massive Varkon dropship descended slowly, its engines roaring like a beast. Dust swirled in violent circles as the ship landed. The council's enforcers marched out in perfect rows, their metal boots pounding in unison. Elias's body screamed for rest, but his mind refused to yield. He dragged himself to his feet, plasma wrench clutched in his good hand. "Elias Ward," a mechanical voice boomed from the lead soldier. "You are charged with rebellion against the council. Surrender and your death will be painless." Elias spat into the sand. "You'll have to work for it." The enforcers raised their blasters. The first shot missed him by inches. The second hit the ground near his feet, spraying hot dust. Elias ran toward the nearest wrecked engine, sliding behind it as bolts of red plasma lit up the air. He was outnumbered, outgunned, but not out of fight. He looked at the wrench in his hand. It wasn't a weapon, but it was enough. He had built things his whole life. Ships, tools, machines. Maybe it was time to build something else. A revolution. He sprinted forward, swinging the wrench into the knee joint of one enforcer. The metal cracked. Sparks flew. The machine fell and Elias grabbed its blaster mid-air. In one smooth motion, he fired back. A dozen enemies dropped before they realized the human wasn't running anymore. Through the smoke, he heard Jorik's faint voice. "Eli." "Behind you." Elias turned just as a massive enforcer lunged. Its claws caught his arm, sending pain shooting through his body. He screamed, kicked the machine backward and shot it point blank in the chest. The explosion lit up the wasteland, but it wasn't enough. More soldiers were closing in. Elias was surrounded. Then came a sound that froze everything. A deep mechanical hum followed by a voice from the dropship speakers. Do not kill him. Bring him alive. Moments later, the enforcers swarmed him. His weapon was torn from his hands, his knees slammed into the sand, and cold metal cuffs locked around his wrists. He had fought like a storm, but the storm had been caught. As they dragged him into the ship, he caught one last glimpse of Jorik lying motionless in the wreckage. The smuggler's eyes, one human, one fading red, and watched him go. Elias didn't know if it was guilt or farewell. Then everything went black. He woke up in a chamber of light and silence. His wrists were bound in glowing energy chains that burned cold against his skin. Before him stood a tall figure, not human, not machine, but something in between. Silver skin, eyes like polished glass, and a voice like thunder. I am High Executor Varn, representative of the Galactic Council, the figure said. You are a danger to order, Elias Ward, but we offer you a choice. Elias lifted his head, blood dripping from his lip. What kind of choice? Give us the children, Varn said smoothly. They are not yours. They belong to the Council. Do this and you will live in peace. Elias stared at him. His whole life flashed before his eyes. The war, the loss, the faces of Kira, Rin, and Lyri. He saw their laughter, their tears, their courage. He thought of Lyri's small hand holding his, whispering, I can fix you. He laughed, broken and defiant. You think I'd sell them? You think I'd trade my soul for mercy? Varn's expression didn't change. Then you choose death, Elias smiled. No, he said softly. I choose freedom. With a roar, he slammed his wrists against the chains. A blinding flash erupted. The implant in his chest, a forgotten relic from his soldier days, overloaded with raw energy. The power surged through the chains, shattering them into shards of light. The explosion tore through the chamber, throwing guards backward. Alarm screamed. Elias stood free, his silhouette framed in fire. The same man who had once been broken now burned brighter than ever. Behind him, other prisoners, humans, aliens, slaves, stared in awe. Elias turned to them, voice echoing like thunder. Are you done being silent? He shouted. Then stand with me. For a moment, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. Then the prisoners rose. Chains shattered. Doors burst open. The rebellion began in that instant, born not from armies, but from one man's refusal to kneel. And as Elias Ward led the charge through the corridors of fire, one thought burned in his heart: they can break the body, but never the will of a father. The rebellion spread like fire through metal veins. When Elias Ward broke his chains, the shockwave wasn't just energy, it was hope. Word of the human who defied the council moved faster than light. Across the mining colonies, slaves rose. On distant worlds, factory workers laid down their tools and picked up weapons. Even some council soldiers hesitated, whispering, he did it. He broke free. But freedom always asks for a price. Elias stood at the heart of the uprising, on the captured ship Aurora's spine, its deck trembling under his boots as explosions bloomed across space. The stars outside burned with chaos. Varkon warships hunted them like wolves, cutting through asteroid fields, firing beams that turned rock to dust. He wiped soot from his face and shouted over the alarms. Rin, divert power to the shields. Kira, get that plasma cannon online now! Kira's hands glowed faintly as she fused broken circuits with her energy. I'm trying. The system's overloaded. Behind them, little Lyri coughed weakly, sitting in a small medical pod. Her breathing mask flickered, the sound shallow and fragile. She was getting worse. Every healing she gave others drained her more. Elias's heart ached each time he looked at her. She had saved hundreds of wounded fighters with her touch, but it was slowly killing her. Stay still, sweetheart, he said gently. We're almost through this. Lyri smiled faintly. You always say that, she whispered, her voice soft as a sigh. Outside the viewport, a blinding flash tore through the void. A Varkon destroyer exploded, fragments scattering like fireworks. The rebel fleet cheered over the comms, voices mixing in triumph and fear. But victory was short-lived. Captain, Rin shouted. New signals, 10 more warships coming from hyperspace. They're surrounding us! Elias slammed his fist against the console. They'll never stop. The bridge shook violently. Sirens wailed. One of the rear thrusters exploded, sending the ship into a spiral. Kira grabbed the controls, her glowing eyes narrowing in focus. I can hold it, she cried, but the strain showed in every breath. Elias steadied himself beside her. "No, you'll burn yourself out. I'm not leaving you," she shouted. Another blast rocked the hull. The lights dimmed. The hum of the engines faltered. They were running out of time. Elias stared at the chaos and felt the old pain. The same pain he'd carried since his wife's death, since the war took everything he loved. He'd promised never to fight again, but life had forced him to break that promise. Now he had one more left to keep, to protect these children no matter the cost. He turned to Rin. "Get her escape pod ready." Rin froze. "What? No. We're not leaving you." Elias's tone softened. "You have to, kid. You and Kira will lead them now. The galaxy needs someone to build after this war is done." Kira's eyes filled with tears. "And what about Lyri?" Elias looked at the little girl lying in the pod. Her breathing was shallow, her small hands glowing faintly as if trying to hold on to life itself. "She needs me," he said quietly. Kira shook her head. "No, we can save you both. There has to be another way." Elias smiled faintly. "There's always another way, just not always for everyone." The next blast hit hard. The deck cracked. Fire spilled from the walls. The ship's AI voice echoed coldly. "Core breach imminent. Evacuate immediately." Elias grabbed the plasma wrench, his oldest weapon now charred and worn, and turned toward the reactor chamber. The core was unstable, glowing like a small star. If it exploded, it would take the entire fleet with it. He knew what he had to do. As he ran down the corridor, Lyri's voice called weakly behind him. "Uncle Eli?" He stopped and turned. She was struggling to sit up, tears in her bright eyes. "Don't go," she whispered. "I can help." Elias knelt beside her and took her hand. Her skin was warm, faintly glowing. "You already did," he said softly. "You showed me what love can still do." Lyri coughed, the sound small and painful. "I don't want you to die." He smiled, the kind of smile that hides pain behind love. "Then remember me living." He kissed her forehead, closed the pod hatch, and pressed the launch button. The pod shot into the darkness of space, carrying Lyri and the future away from death. Elias turned back toward the reactor. His implant hummed, the same one that broke his chains before. He placed his hands on the control conduit, feeling the energy pulsing beneath his skin. "This is for all of you," he whispered. For every soul they chained. He triggered the overload manually. The light swallowed everything, white, pure, endless, from the escape pod. Lyri's eyes widened as the Aurora's spine erupted behind her, turning into a burst of golden light that tore through the enemy fleet. One ship after another fell silent. The explosion ended the battle, and began the legend. The voice of Elias Ward spread across the stars, recorded in the last transmission the rebels received. "Freedom isn't won by power. It's born from sacrifice. Tell them I kept my promise." Lyri pressed her small hands to the glass, tears floating weightless in zero gravity. "Goodbye, Dad," she whispered. The light faded, leaving only silence and a new dawn for the galaxy. The stars were quieter now. The fires of rebellion had faded, and peace had begun to take shape across the scarred worlds of the galaxy. But even in silence, his name still echoed. Elias Ward, the man who broke his chains, the father who defied an empire. It had been 10 years since the explosion that ended the war. The ashes of the Galactic Council drifted through space, their ships shattered, their rule broken. From those ashes, a new alliance was born, one built not by generals or machines, but by those who had once been slaves, orphans, and outcasts. They called it the Free Systems Accord, and at its heart were 3 names forever linked: Kira, Rin, and Lyri Ward, the adopted children of the man who taught the galaxy what freedom meant. The Garden of Remembrance on Zareth 9 was unlike anything the planet had ever known. Once a wasteland of smoke and steel, it now bloomed with alien flowers that glowed softly at night. The people had built it to honor the fallen, especially one man. In the center stood a tall statue of Elias Ward, carved from the metal of the ship Aurora's spine. His face was kind, his eyes lifted toward the stars, and in his outstretched hand rested a small, glowing light, symbolizing the freedom he gave. Every year, crowds gathered there. Veterans placed their weapons at his feet. Children, both human and alien, whispered his story as if it were a prayer. But today, only 3 figures stood before the statue. Kira, taller now, wore a silver commander's jacket. Her once bright blue eyes had matured, calmer, wiser, but the same fire burned behind them. Rin stood beside her, his hair now streaked with faint silver, a side effect of his energy abilities. He carried a small device that hummed with gentle power, a remnant of the technology their father had once built. And between them stood Leary, no longer the fragile child she once was. Her breathing mask was gone, replaced by the soft rhythm of her own steady lungs. She had grown into a healer whose touch could mend both bodies and spirits. They stood in silence, looking up at the statue of the man who had given them everything. 10 years, Kira said softly. It still feels like yesterday. Rin nodded. He saved billions. But sometimes I wish he'd saved himself too. Leary's eyes glistened, the light reflecting in them. He did, she whispered. He lives here. She placed her hand over her heart. He saved himself through us. For a long moment, none of them spoke. The wind moved through the glowing flowers, carrying the scent of new life. Then Kira turned toward the distant horizon where the stars shimmered. Do you ever think he knew this would happen? That his fight would change everything? Rin smiled faintly. Knowing him, yeah. He always saw more than we did. He didn't just fight to survive, like he fought so we'd have something to live for. Leary looked up at the sky. I still hear him sometimes, she said quietly. When I help someone, when I see a child smile, it's like he's there watching. They all fell silent again. Then in the distance, the hum of a ship grew louder. A small transport landed nearby and a group of young cadets stepped out, fresh recruits of the Free Systems Alliance. They gathered around the statue, wide-eyed, their voices full of curiosity. Is it true? One of them asked. That he fought an entire army with just a wrench? Rin chuckled. Yeah, he said. But the weapon didn't matter. What mattered was the heart behind it. Another cadet pointed at Leary. You're his daughter, aren't you? What was he like? Leary smiled, her voice calm but full of warmth. He was just human, she said. He got scared, he made mistakes, but he never stopped protecting what was right. He showed us that courage isn't about power, it's about love. Kira looked at the recruits, her tone firm but kind. Remember this, freedom isn't given. It's kept alive by people who refuse to let it die. The cadets nodded, their faces lit by the glow of the statue. They saluted, and one placed a small plaque at its base. The words were simple, carved in both human and alien script. He fought not for glory, but for hearts that could still feel. He was a father, and through him, we remembered what we were meant to be. Later, when the crowd was gone, the three siblings remained. The night sky stretched endlessly above them, filled with constellations of rebuilt worlds. For a moment, the stars flickered, and among them Kira thought she saw a shape, a man standing tall, holding light in his hand, watching over them. She smiled through her tears. We did it, Dad, she whispered. The chains are gone. A soft wind brushed past them, carrying warmth, as if the galaxy itself had exhaled, and somewhere in that vast, endless sky, the legend of the human father lived on, not in stone, not in stories, but in every soul that chose compassion over control, love over fear, and freedom over silence, because in the end, it wasn't a weapon that changed the stars. It was the heart of one man who refused to stop being a father.